Thank you all for being on again today with this webinar. Hopefully, we'll walk away from this for all of you, providing you information that is useful. Unlike our other webinars that we've had over the last few months, where there's a lot of back and forth and sharing between the members, today I think we are going to focus on those matters that we think are important for you to hear about right now. And we have Jen Smith and her lobbying team on with us today, Brad Monastic, our attorney, really to spend time talking about the most recent order from the Department of Health and Human Services, and also talk about what lame duck legislative session looks like. And I just want to take a little bit of time to say, for all of you that were at the conference a couple of weeks ago, thank you very much for your attendance. We're still waiting for all the feedback from our members, but what we initially got back during the conference was that it was successful, and we were really happy with that. The member experience to us was very important, and hopefully we met the expectations on that. Also, personal thanks to all of you with the most recent order from the Department of Health and Human Services. It's another pivot the schools have had to make, and I think that schools have, again, done well in the change. We've been adaptable. We're continuing to serve our kids and our communities. But I know from talking to many of you and talking to SUPS that, this is just, it's not an easy time to be a school board member. It's not an easy time to be a superintendent. And just thank you for everything that you're doing. On a positive note, I'll just say that I hope that even though it will be different than in past years, that you're able to celebrate Thanksgiving next week and connect, even if it's virtually, with family members and others, because, as much as we're all dealing with what we are from a pandemic standpoint, I still think there's much to be thankful for, particularly in the educational setting. And so I just wanted to pass that along from me to you, and I'm going to turn this over to Jen to kind of manage throughout the meeting. Like we always do, you can put chat in the chat box. That's probably the easiest method. We've got about 110 people on today, so seeing hands raised isn't the easiest thing to do. So if you can, use the chat function to say that you have a question as Jen and Brad and the rest of Jen's team goes through this morning, goes through this afternoon's webinar. Thank you all for being here. And with that, Jen.
Thanks, Don. So like Don said, we're going to talk about the DHHS order that came out over the weekend. It came out Sunday night. And then Jeff and I will cover the few issues that we're trying to push in lame duck and what we think may happen in lame duck. This year, it's even more up in the air than it's been in past years. So what we say today could be wrong tomorrow. We'll have to see. But we'll start with the DHHS order that came out Sunday night. It's an epidemic order that DHHS is allowed to issue under the Public Health Code. This is not the same as the governor's executive orders. Those were struck down, as you know, by the Supreme Court back in October. And the law that the Department of Health and Human Services uses actually dates back to the Spanish flu to give them the ability to control gathering sizes to get the Spanish flu under control. And so it's been on our books for quite some time, and it has been used as necessary. So everything in the order refers to gathering sizes because that's what DHHS is allowed to control. So the order that came out on Sunday for in-home gatherings, residential gatherings, it is still a limit of 10 people, but now it should only be 2 households. So it can't be 10 people from 3 different places that don't live together, just one other household. So keep that in mind as you're doing Thanksgiving, that even though it's still 10 people, the limit is tying it to how many households can be together at one time. The outdoor gathering limit is down to 25, and masks are still required at all indoor gatherings, except in your home. They're highly encouraged in your home, and they're highly encouraged for outdoor as well. The capacity limitations at libraries, museums, retail, all of that have been lowered. And there is no longer indoor dining at bars or restaurants, outdoor or takeout only. So the goal that they have set with this, and one of the things she said, is that they want to be able to bring they want schools to be able to safely go face to face. And so they're taking these steps now to try to give us the room to do that. She said that as far as metrics, they're going to be watching information every day and the numbers every day to see where the numbers are going. Michigan is at a 13% positivity rate statewide right now, which is basically says the disease is out of control. So these are the steps that they took, and we'll get into the school stuff next. So for schools, K through 8, pre-K through 8 is allowed to be face-to-face. 9 through 12 must close. And all of this happened as of 12:01 this morning. So you should already know most of this and be responding to it. Just wanted to touch on some of the details. So 9 through 12 has to be remote only, except for special education and English language learners. They are allowed to be face-to-face. The buildings can be used as necessary. So if a teacher needs internet access, or it's being used for food distribution or physical or mental health care, the building can be used for that, but a high school building may not be used for instructional purposes. This is only for 3 weeks. It's in effect until December 8th at 11:59 p.m. All sports are halted, all of them. Even if you're making a state run in football, you gotta wait. And MHSAA actually took it a step further and said that fall sports were not to start on Monday. There were some sports seasons where practice was allowed to start on Monday, and MHSAA actually said no to that as well. So sports should have halted as of Monday, but absolutely as of today. MHSAA has also said that if we get some of these restrictions lifted, if we all do our part in these 3 weeks, they will do their best to still finish the playoffs for all of the winter sports, because just about every winter sport was at some level in their playoffs. So their goal is to be able to do that still. They will not do it until these orders are lifted. They also force colleges and universities online as well. And for colleges and university sports, there are very strict guidelines they have to follow to do sports. So it is different than youth sports, and it's different than pro sports. But pro sports can follow the DHHS guidelines. They have been all along. There are no spectators whatsoever allowed at anything, though. So they were allowing family members at an MSU game. You can't even have family members there now. And the NFL is not allowed, or the Lions have not been allowed to have spectators at all. So the professional sports will probably continue the way they are. College sports are at a question. You're encouraged to continue to work with your local health departments on the decisions on your pre-K through 8 to make the best decision for your community. But the option is there to be face-to-face or remote. And I'm going to turn it over to Brad to touch on some of the more detailed nuances of the order.
Thank you, Jen. I did see a few questions that came up in the chat box. I will address those questions in a minute. First, just wanted to add a few things to what Jen indicated. So in addition to the 10-person limitation on gatherings at residential venues, we now have a strict prohibition on any type of gathering at a non-residential venue. And that's where your school board meetings come into play. So as of today, you can have no in-person school board meetings. You can't even have the hybrid type of meeting that MASB was suggesting during the issuance of the other executive orders. That's the type of meeting where you have board members meeting in person, but you're still conducting a virtual meeting. Because this order prohibits any type of non-residential gathering, unless it fits into one of the 11 exceptions, you can't have board members gathering together for the purpose of having a virtual meeting. So as of today, all your school board meetings must be 100% virtual. Board members cannot gather in a school district to conduct a school district building to conduct that virtual meeting. When you look at the 11 exceptions, you can't interpret any of those exceptions to cover a school board meeting. So no exception to having a virtual school board meeting. It must be done between now and December 8th. And obviously you have to have meetings. The monthly meeting requirement is still in play. That was previously suspended by an executive order, but as Jen indicated, those executive orders have been made invalid due to a Supreme Court decision. So the monthly meeting requirement that applies to local school boards still applies. And then also you have the monthly requirement of reconfirming your COVID-19 extended learning plan. So that hasn't been suspended. So you're still required to do that reconfirmation on a monthly basis. So no exceptions to having a monthly meeting. Haven't had your November meeting yet. That must be done virtually. And unless things change between now and December 13th, likely going to have your December meeting virtually as well. One exception that may apply to your new board members or a recently elected board member is taking the oath of office in person and accepting the office of school board member. I think as of last night, counties finally certified election results. I know in Wayne County, it went back and forth, but eventually they certified their election results. So the notice of certification should be going out to recently elected board members. And once those board members receive notice of that, there's a 10-day window to accept the office of school board member. And that has to be accepted via a notary public. And that can be done remotely, but I read an exception in the order to allow for that to be accomplished in person. If you look at the exceptions, C4 indicates that voting or official election related activities are not subject to the prohibition on gatherings. So in my opinion, that would cover taking an oath of office or accepting the office. And the oath of office must be administered by a notary as well. So what you may want to consider doing under the circumstances, have your new board members come in to the administrative office, take care of that election responsibility of the oath of office, acceptance of office, and then you can do a ceremonial oath of office at your organizational meeting in January. And the High School Athletic Association, has been in touch with your athletic directors, so your athletic directors are on the same page as far as what this order requires. And hopefully, as Jen indicated, the tournaments will pick up after the restrictions are lifted. But we'll see what happens after December 8th. So the issue of going 100% remote learning, which you're required to do now for high school, and requiring your teacher to be in the school building offering that remote learning. What comes into play on this issue is the MIOSHA emergency rule that requires, if you have individuals who can perform their work remotely, they must be allowed to perform their work remotely. So in your school district, the issue becomes, are your teachers able to teach those classes remotely from their residence rather than in the school building? Under the MIOSHA emergency rule, your districts are not going to be able to adopt a hard and fast rule stating teachers, you have to report to a school building to perform your work remotely. It's a factual based analysis and it may vary from district to district. And a district should have documentation as far as why you're requiring individuals to come in to work rather than to perform their duties and responsibilities remotely. So that's what that issue is going to come down to. Even going back to the spring, if there were difficulties in teachers teaching their lessons in the spring, that should have been documented, and you can rely on that documentation as rationale for having your teachers come into a school building to do the remote teaching. So that's what would have to be presented to MIOSHA if there is a MIOSHA complaint. I know in some districts, employees or unions have been, presenting that as a possible threat, as if we're required to come into work, where MIOSHA may be involved in this issue. I just want to make sure that your administration has the proper documentation to show that these are the reasons why we're requiring certain groups of staff members to come into work rather than performing their responsibilities remotely. So I think that's all I want to cover. Jen, are there any other questions, Don? That
Yeah, I saw a couple there. One would be, Brad, if a teacher feels like they can best perform the job of teaching remotely and they want to make that choice to be in the building to do so, would they be allowed to do so? Or
Well,
can a
they would
school
make
allow
it-
that?
they would make a request to the administration. The administration should have a form for the individual to fill out to make that request. And then there would, be an interactive discussion in regard to, whether the administration feels the teacher is adequately going to be able to perform that job, the responsibilities of the job remotely.
Okay. And one other question that was in here, high school building is used for 6 through 12 instruction. Does that mean that 6 through 8 should be out of the building as well?
I don't interpret the order in that manner. I don't, I'm not sure if Jeff heard any additional information on that, but the order simply says 9 through 12. Instruction is in person is prohibited. So even though it's the same building, I think your 8 through 6 would be able to participate in person. That's kind of how I interpret it.
And that would be what we have been told too, is the 6 through 8 can be in person in that building. Just the 9 through 12 cannot.
And probably the rationale behind that is, what has been found is that maybe the students are gathering more socially outside of school time, and that's contributing to possibly spreading the virus as compared to your younger students. And obviously the interest of maybe a bit more difficult for the younger students to learn remotely as well. I'm sure all that comes into play.
And the governor and Dr. Calhoun were asked that question during the press conference, and the governor had said that they have seen, in person is more important for younger students. It's harder for them to learn remotely, as Brad said. And they have seen that 50% of all K-12 cases are in a high school setting. So the other 50% are the rest of the staff and all the other buildings, the K-8. And that 50% of cases has led to more cases than the outbreaks you see in the younger grades. And it could be, as Brad indicated, that high schoolers are socializing more. It could just be the changing classes. It's harder to cohort them. That was another reason they mentioned it. And just that the access to learning online is easier for older students. But Dr. Calhoun focused on the numbers and that the cases that are happening in the high schools have broader spread than the cases that are happening in the younger grades. And so that was part of their decision making on requiring the high schools to go remote. Brad, there's a question about election certification for newly elected school board members and what has to happen. Can you briefly fill them in?
Sure. So under the election law, within 10 business days after the newly elected board member receives the certification of election, the secretary of the board, and a lot of times this is delegated to the executive assistant of the superintendent, must ensure that this individual takes the acceptance of office. So there's an actual deadline for taking this acceptance of office, and it's a document that must be notarized. That has to be done within 10 business days after that candidate receives the certification of election. Now, the oath of office doesn't have the same deadline. That oath of office can be taken at any time between now and when the board member's term begins on January 1. But because a notary has to essentially administer both of those, it just makes sense to take care of them at one time. And what a lot of districts will do, they'll have the newly elected candidate come into the administrative offices after the election certification results, and have the newly elected candidate file the acceptance of office at that time, as well as have the notary administer the oath of office. And that's the official oath of office. So that, that has to be done before the individual takes office. And then you can do a ceremonial oath, at your organizational meeting, and that ceremonial oath can be administered by the board president or anyone else. The reason why that must be done is if someone doesn't take the or accept the office within 10 business days after the receiving the notice of the certification of election results, that office could become vacant. And then while you could still appoint that person to the vacant office, they're only appointed until the next election. So it's important to get that acceptance of office taken care of within the next 10 business days here.
And the notice of certification, that comes from the County Board of Canvassers?
Yes, yep. And I know Wayne just certified their election results last night. So I'm assuming that notification will be provided today or the following day. So that goes to the candidate, and sometimes school districts are copied on that. But your executive assistants should be in close contact with your recently elected candidates to determine when they've received their notice of election.
And then there's a question about confusion on how districts are handling special education. Do we have any thoughts? Under the order, special education is allowed to be face-to-face. So it is a district decision, but we know in the spring, that was one of the big issues, is that some special education services just can't be done remotely. And so they created this carve out for all special ed students, pre-K through age 26, to allow them to be able to have face-to-face instruction. Beyond that, I don't know, Brad, if you have any thoughts on that. I don't know what individual districts are doing, but it is left to their discretion.
No, I really don't have any additional thoughts on that. I haven't received any questions about it. I will defer to the special education experts on whether they're bringing in their special education students in person to the instruction and meet the objectives of the individual's education plans for the students. And it may go back to that plan actually for particular students. And that's going to be the foundation of providing the services for that student, whether it complies with the IEP.
And how can we expect our elementary teachers to work in person if we're not having meetings in person? I know this is something that districts dealt with at the beginning of the school year as well, as we were trying to get hybrid meetings to be allowed. And it really comes down to your district decision. The order is clear, as Brad said, you cannot meet in person, but your K-8 can be in person. So there is some feeling of hypocrisy there, but we have to follow what the order says. If special education students are in school, do teachers have to be there to provide services? Yes, those teachers would be exempted from the not coming into the building piece. Because instruction is allowed for the special education kids, you obviously have to have the staff there. So that staff is different than your high school algebra teacher who has to do her teaching remote. Are there any other questions about the order? And then there's a couple more election questions, and then we'll move on to lame duck.
I see the question, Jen, about the acceptance of notarization. That's required by law. It has to be notarized. The acceptance of office must be notarized, and the oath of office must be administered by a notary. There are some other folks who can minister, but it's like a judge, a member of the legislature. So usually it's a notary who's administering that oath. I mean, it can be done remotely. There's actually a guidance document published by the Secretary of State on performing notarial duties electronically and remotely. It's a pretty involved process to do that. So my thought is utilize the exception in the executive order, have come in person, ensuring you're wearing masks, ensuring your social distancing, and get it taken care of in that way.
And does the notification come electronically or in the mail?
To be honest, I don't know. my thought would be that it would come in the mail, but it may be both. They may have a electronic notification as well as a notification in the mail as well. So I don't know.
And back to the order, and this sort of borders on MIOSHA as well. If a district decided to go temporarily remote for all grades, are those staff allowed to teach in the classroom? And I think this falls between the high schools having to be closed, but the K-8 is optional, but I'm not sure where MIOSHA would fall down on that. Brad, do you have a thought?
Yeah, again, it's a fact-based analysis. You just, I don't think you can adopt a rule that applies to everyone saying all staff must be present at a school building to perform your duties and responsibilities in regard to the remote learning. You have to go through the analysis and determine whether it's required for them to be there and have that documentation showing that you've gone through the analysis.
And then each board decides the style of education in their district, but what are the metrics for indicating the pandemic is out of control? And this was asked as well of the governor and Dr. Khaldun, like what metrics will you use to decide whether or not we can reopen our schools? And they were very clear that their first reopening is, their goal for the first reopening on December 8th are high schools. That the goal of doing all of this and the shutdown is to put Michigan back under control and get kids back face-to-face in the classroom. When asked about the metrics, they were not specific. They talked about everyone needing to do their part because if we mask up, wash our hands, 6 feet of distance, and follow these rules, we can lower the curve again. That our curve right now is a straight line up. They've shown that the incubation period for the disease from exposure can be 2 to 3 weeks. And so that's why they went with the 3-week shutdown. They want to keep the testing numbers high. The more testing we get, the more we can do the contact tracing, which stops the spread. There are some limitations in areas as far as how you can get a test or if you can get a test, but the goal is to keep the testing numbers very high. They're going to be watching the numbers as far as the testing rates and the positivity and the percent positivity rates out of those tests, but they did not give a hard and fast number. And part of that could be because you see fluctuations all over the state as to how high it is, but I know they want that 13% statewide number to come down. So they said this is going to be an everyday evaluation, but they were not specific enough for the positivity rate within your area. When it comes to K-8, you're still back at the return to learn and talking to your local health department as far as the outbreaks in your various districts. There may be a reason for your K-8 to be remote, but the order gives you the option to make that decision. Our school board meetings permitted in person. I think you covered this in the beginning, Brad, that this does not allow for gatherings of any size that are not residential, and so they must be virtual until after the 8th of December. Yeah,
even if it's a committee meeting, if there can be no in-person gathering is what it comes down to. So there's no exception, for boards or their. So if you're holding a committee meeting, most definitely it has to be done virtually.
All right, well, if you think of a question about the order, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. We're going to move on to our lame duck and whether or not there will be one and what we expect. And part of what's going on with lame duck is the breakouts in the Capitol. So we know that there were 2 representatives that have tested positive over the last couple of weeks. We also know that there were 2 senators that tested positive over the last few weeks. Senator Antonik would be on the closing end of his quarantine time. Unfortunately for Senator Lasada, she was in session on that Thursday, a week ago Thursday. She was in session, she was in committee meetings. She had been tested on Wednesday and she got a positive test on Thursday night. So they're contact tracing there, they're checking with people and making sure that they're getting tested as far as who she may have been around when she was at session. She had said that it was done at a routine doctor's appointment. They issued the test, she was asymptomatic, and so she came to session. We also know that there is staff in both the Senate and the House that are that have tested positive. We don't know how many, that none of that information is released. We only know the representatives and senators who test positive when they announce it. So we do have an issue in the legislature, and we saw session cancel last Thursday because they had too many people in quarantine and there were worries about coming into the Capitol. They were supposed to meet today. That has been canceled as well. They added today because they didn't meet last Thursday. The Senate did, the House did not. They both scheduled session for today. They both canceled session for today. So they're due back on December 1. But the big question is, can they get a quorum? And one representative made an offhand comment to some people that between the quarantines and the people who refuse to come to Lansing to possibly expose themselves, getting a quorum is going to be difficult, which makes lame duck difficult. We've heard rumors that the Senate Majority Leader could shut down lame duck that first week they come back, which would make the few things we're going to talk about that we're looking for virtually impossible to do. When they adjourn sine die, the House is done because the session ends. The House has to be sworn back in January. They're sworn in on the second Wednesday of January, and then business can begin after that. So if they adjourn early in December, there will be no legislative action whatsoever until at least the third week of January, but probably later. Because the House is starting a brand new session, they have to establish committees, they have to elect their leadership, people have to find the bathroom, and how to even draft a bill. So work does not normally begin in the House until at least the end of January once committees have been assigned. And that assigning of committees is a very long, tedious process. So there is going to be a chunk of time where nothing can be done. So we don't know what to expect out of lame duck. Maybe this time over Thanksgiving is going to be enough for people to quarantine and feel safe to come back. But when they allowed public bodies to go virtual in the spring, they did not create a way for the legislature to go virtual. They are not allowed to vote virtually or to meet virtually under the current rules and law. So they are stuck with having to be in person. So all of that is going to play into what we can get done over the next few weeks. And of course, this is the one lame duck where we actually have issues we want to push through, and now we may not see it happen. I am going to have Jeff kick off. We're going to cover 4 issues that we are pushing really hard on. And then if you have other issues you're hearing about or questions or things you'd like to see or not see, please put those in the chat. We'll cover those as well. But we're going to cover the 4 top issues that MASB is looking at. And I'll turn it to Jeff to cover the first one.
Sure. So one of the big issues deals with doing evaluations for teachers and then for your evaluations of superintendents. And so one of the big problems we have right now is that a portion of the evaluation is to be based on student growth. And as you know, last spring, we didn't do any testing. And it's unclear in this coming spring if they'll be doing testing. I know the current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, was not going to give a waiver. And so we would have had to test, but with a new secretary coming in, that person may feel differently about that. And so without that testing data, it becomes difficult to do the evaluations using student growth. So there are 2 bills that have been introduced in the Senate by Senator Horn. They're Senate bills 1176 and 1177. They are in the Senate Education and Career Readiness Committee. And we are pushing to get those taken up. What they would do essentially is eliminate the student growth component out of the evaluation process. Individual districts would still be allowed to use student growth if they chose, and they would be allowed to determine what measurements they wanted to use to determine student growth. So it would be up to districts to do that, but it would eliminate the state mandate for using student growth. We have reached out to the bill sponsor and to staff on the Senate side, and there's I think it's going to be a heavy lift for them to get it done because it's still in the Senate. So they would, if they were to take it up, they would have to take it probably the first week of December when they get back and pass it out of committee and out of the Senate and get it over to the House to have any chance of it getting done before the end of the year. But we are going to make a strong push for that because we think it will allow you all to do, to better perform evaluations if we remove that piece. So that's one of our priorities. Jen?
So another one is dealing with substitute teachers, and we have been working with our counterparts at MASA and MASSP and MAISA on language that would open up some of your subs, but only under this current pandemic that we're in. And so the language that we're looking at, we would sub into a bill that already exists in House Education Committee, and that sponsor is open to allowing us to do this. We're also talking to the unions, but until we get language back, the unions are not going to sign off on the idea. They want to see the actual language. And we do this all the time. We totally understand why they want to do that. But the idea is that for a district that is operating under a COVID-19 extended learning plan, that they would be able to take a staff person that is already employed by the district, that has at least a high school diploma or the equivalent, and is at least 21 years old, and assign them as a substitute in the classroom. It would be voluntary, that you could not require the person to substitute. That person would be allowed to refuse. And those are some of the things, those last couple of things are some of the things that the union was worried about. They don't want administration to just say, okay, bus driver, today you're teaching third grade. But we know from reports and personal experience even that part of the reason that districts are needing to go remote is because of the lack of staff. And so this is a short-term fix that would take staff that is already in your district. So they've already passed your background checks. They may already know the students, but to use them on a short-term basis to put a body in the classroom. We've talked to a couple of districts that have done this with people who qualify as substitute teachers. So they have that 60 hours. And they talked about different ways that they've done it, have included the teacher is remote, but there is a person in the classroom to help. And then having a sort of a mentor teacher type thing. So if there's a substitute like this in one classroom, the teacher in the classroom next door is perfectly willing to help the one that's not normally a teacher. So this was something that came up because we know that teacher shortages are real. And in COVID, they're even worse as you have people that go into quarantine, that you may lose a teacher for 10 to 14 days because they have to quarantine either with their child or their spouse or because of exposure themselves. So this is a short-term fix that we're looking for. MASB is in talks with the other groups about possibly changing this to be just for this school year and not just when you're under a plan. The idea about being under the plan is if for some terrible reason this pandemic continues into the beginning of next year, we wouldn't have to revisit this. Some of the concerns we've had with the sub-bill, I see that's one of the questions. There was a concern about loss of learning if you have, say, the janitor in your 5th grade class. But the offset to that was the idea that there are students that are better off in school than they are at home. And so we want to get as many students into the classroom that need to be there. And so this is optional. The district decides if you want to take this route or if you want to go fully remote. That still lies in your hands. This would just be one more option for possibilities to fill some of those substitute positions. And then we have a second bill dealing with substituting, and Jeff will cover that one.
Sure. So one of the issues, we've been doing our priority settings across the, state, and the big issue is teacher shortages and substitute shortages. And so there is a bill right now that is in the Senate Committee on Appropriations. It's House Bill 4694. It amends the Retirement Act. And so what we're looking to do is we want to basically allow retirees to come back and teach without losing their retirement benefits. Right now, they're currently allowed to do that in areas of critical shortages, but that section is set to expire early next year. And so what we're asking is to move that back and to eliminate that sunset, or at least move it back several years, so that retirees can continue to teach in those critical shortage areas and or substitute without losing their benefits. So we have agreement from the bill sponsor to put that language in his bill. It's in the Senate right now, so it's already passed the House. So we think we have a pretty good shot at doing that. We're working with some of the other education groups as well. So we think that could open up a pool of candidates to fill some of those vacancies that we're having with teachers. Jen?
The last issue, and we're hoping, this is probably the most critical one that we want to do before the end of the year, is on Open Meetings Act. So if you remember back in October, so not even a month ago, we passed Senate Bill 1108, which allowed you to have remote meetings. It also was retroactive, which is why we pushed so hard to get it done. So there wouldn't be any question that the decisions you made at the board table in a remote meeting from April 30th through October 2nd were legitimate or not. So this bill was retroactive and allowed for all of those things to continue through the end of this year. So you can hold a remote meeting for whatever reason through the end of this year. Beginning January 1, there are only 3 reasons that you can join a meeting remotely. And that would be if you are deployed in the military, if you have a medical condition, or if your area is under a state of emergency. That state of emergency could be local or a state of emergency, but you must be under a state of emergency. So now that we're looking at this 3-week order from DHHS that is forcing us back to remote meetings, the concern is now even greater, that what if this continues until the first of the year? You're going to have an order that requires you to be remote. You're going to have a law that says that you can't. So we are pushing for, at minimum, an extension of that December 31 deadline to either spring, end of the school year, or end of next year. And that's originally what we had asked for in this bill, is for a December 31 of 2021 sunset. They talked it back to a July 1 to get it through the school year. Then the sponsor said, I'd rather do spring. Then it hit the Senate caucus, and there were 2 very vocal senators who don't like this idea at all. And they would not support and wanted it moved to December 31st of 2020. So right now, that's where we stand. And then on January 1 of 2022, the only way you can participate in a remote meeting is if you are deployed in the military. We would rather see this open up. We know that you have had some success with these meetings. Their big argument against allowing remote meetings is that it's not as transparent to the public. And I think that your attendance at these meetings proved differently. So we're trying to get this moved. The other thing we were trying to do as a best worst case scenario or worst best case scenario is to extend the definition of medical condition to mean not just you, but someone in your household. So if I'm perfectly healthy, but I live with a vulnerable person, either my child or my husband, I could participate remotely in order to protect them. Right now, as written, it says that you must have the medical condition, and so you wouldn't be excused for those reasons. Ideally, we would like to just get rid of the sunset, allow for remote meetings, and a policy that the board creates so that you can do these going forward, no matter what the circumstances, as your board decides to do them. We're not going to get that far in lame duck. So that's going to be something we're going to continue to work on before January 1 of 2022, when the restrictions become really tight. But for lame duck, it is the one thing we are pushing really hard because of that December 31 deadline. And so this is our first call of action to all of you. Please contact your senators, contact your representatives, let them know how remote voting has worked for you, or remote meetings have worked for you, even the hybrid meetings, and the need to do this. If this order gets extended past the 31st of December, you are in a terrible position. And school boards are in a different place than a lot of other publicly elected bodies because you are required by law to meet once a month and required by a second law to vote once a month. No other public body has that restriction on them. And this legislature is requiring you to vote once a month. So they should find a way to allow you to do that. But we are going to need all the grassroots support we can on this because we're going to need to move it pretty quickly. And lobbying looks a lot different for us now as it did before. We can't hang around the Capitol and hope to catch the people we need to or pull them off the floor to talk to them because of the limitations and because of our own desire for safety from some of the members of the legislature. So we really do need your help to contact them. The senators that were most opposed to it was Senator McBroom and Senator Barrett. Senator Barrett thought that a medical condition was a weak excuse and it could be, I have a broken leg, I don't want to come, and that you'll use it as an excuse. Senator McBroom feels that if you are on a Zoom meeting, we have no idea if that's really you. You may have gotten up to go to the bathroom and you're not participating, but that it is an easy way out for you to not have to go. And quite honestly, listening to their arguments was offensive to many of us because we know how hard you are working in all other publicly elected bodies, that we're not using Zoom as an excuse. But it is a sign of the times that we can do meetings this way. And so they will definitely need convincing. In the House, the only person that really spoke out strongly was Representative Bo Lefebvre for many of the same reasons you heard from Senator McBroom, that he's worried about, and I swear he said this, he's worried about deals that are made in the bathroom because you're not on Zoom. I don't know what the obsession with the bathroom is dealing with open meetings, but apparently you should never go to the bathroom during a meeting. But these are sort of the arguments that we're dealing with. And we're trying to push, I have been in contact with both the Senate majority staff and the House majority staff, as well as the governor's office, to say this is a #1 lame duck priority for us because it has a deadline. The governor's office is with us. The House staff has said this is definitely on their radar, but she knows it's going to be a tough lift in the House. So contacting your House members is very important. I have not yet heard back from the Senate staff as to where things lie over there. But I know when we did this bill before, when we originally did 1108, the Senate majority staff that I was working with were on our side on this. They understood our concerns and understood that we are required to meet and required to vote. So that is probably our #1 issue. But as with any lame duck, you may get a lot of emails from us, and they may come in more than once a day because as issues start to move quickly, it's an instantaneous, we want to get your help as fast as we can. So stick with us for the next month and let us, as we bombard you with emails, if you have questions, let us know. If there are issues and rumors you hear, let us know. We will help in any way we can, and we just ask that you react and respond to those alerts to the best of your ability to make sure that your elected officials know how this all affects you. That community outreach is going to be so important right now, that this is not a normal world and we can't treat it like it is. So that community outreach, hearing from their constituents is going to be really, really important. Zess, will you send us talking points on OMA? Absolutely. We will have an alert that is going to go out on the 30th, just before they come back, that will hit their offices. It will have all the talking points in it. If you need something sooner, let me know. Can a township declare a state of emergency? This was a question that we've had about a township creating a state of emergency. And also if a district is in multiple areas, who do they have to respond to? And I don't know that I have an answer. Brad, do you have an answer to that or an idea?
I can answer the first question. Yes, a township board can declare a state of local state of emergency. I know the answer to the question if the district expands into multiple townships. So yeah, you may want to touch base with your township board on that one, and because I'm sure they've been seeking guidance from their legal counsel on the issue.
And then the bill number for the second priority, that was on these substitutes. We don't have that language yet, so I can't give you a bill number yet. We're still waiting for LSB to get back to us and the sign off from the bill sponsor to say, yes, he'll accept the sub. So I don't have a bill number for that yet. Hopefully LSB is working quickly and we'll get something soon. The LSB is the Legislative Service Bureau. They are the nonpartisan lawyers that draft all of our legislation. So we're just waiting to get information back from them. All right, are there any other lame duck related questions or issues we didn't cover that you'd like to see or wouldn't like to see coming up? I think if they do come back, the other thing to keep in mind is obviously education is not the only thing on the agenda. They are still holding hearings. There's one coming up dealing where they're bringing in the Kent County clerk and the Antrim County clerk to take questions from the oversight committee. They had already brought in Chris Thomas, who is a former Bureau of Elections chief, who was helping out in Detroit. They've already brought him in to answer questions about the election. The Electoral College is seated on December 17th or
14th.
whatever that Monday is. That's when the Electoral College is seated to vote. So you may hear some of these certification questions right up to that moment. The other thing that the governor is asking for is a statewide mask mandate. So it's not done through orders, but it is in law. Senator Shirkey and Representative Chatfield have both been vocal to say they will not support it. Representative Chatfield has said that he would like to see something that allows each county to determine the level of their restrictions and mask mandates and everything, that it would be a county by county decision, not a state decision at all. Senator Shirkey has said, well, we're going to just raise awareness, and they have started a series of public service announcements from your state senator telling you to wear a mask, but he is not willing to go beyond a PSA. I'm sure there are other COVID issues from executive orders that have been struck down that we may see them consider, but it is still toxic between the leadership and the governor on the COVID-19 response. Her announcement on Sunday was not met warmly by Senator Shirkey, especially, accusing her of, again, making her own decisions and not talking to them. In the press conference, she said that she has asked them for a plan and has seen nothing. And she has ordered Director Gordon to do what he needs to do to protect Michigan. So that's the rhetoric that has been going on since March, and it hasn't changed. We also have not seen anything out of the legislature dealing with COVID-19 issues, other than the few executive orders that they did codify back in October. So that's always out there. That is always a case. And as we know, lame duck is a time where deals are made and souls are bought and sold. So part of our lobby strategy is, well, if they're going to make you take that, then make them take this. And so that's where our 4 priorities will continue to be, is we want them done. We'd rather just have them done and not have to horse trade for them. But horse trading is a huge part of lame duck. So we'll have to see how it goes. If there are no other questions, I will turn it back to Don.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks for all the questions that people had. Thanks, Brad and Jeff and Deshandra for answering questions too. Just before we let everybody go, I also wanted to point out, and many of you might be aware, MASB's website has been down for the last going on 48 hours. We have put up a new landing page to get you to kind of timely information for those that want to register for our CBA weekend. That is still there. Information relating to nominating members that might be interested in running for our board of directors is available. And of course, registration for today was still up and available, largely because those sites are separate from our main website. Our main website is hosted outside of Michigan, as many websites are, instead of hosting them on a server locally. And that company is having problems. They have contacted us to let us know. They are doing their best to get, and it's affected not only us, but affected all of their clients. They are working to address that. We don't have a time frame So as we need to, we will keep that landing page available for people to get the most pertinent information. And we are hopeful that we will have this resolved within this week. We just don't have enough information yet from that provider as far as a time frame. But I wanted to let you know that we are working on it, and our apologies that it's down. But right now it's outside of our control. So that's all that I have. Wanted to, again, I'll wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you again for all the work that you're doing in our districts. Have a good rest of this week, and good holidays as we go into next week.